So first of all, thank you all for being here. Now I think our guest needs no introduction, but I'll provide anyway. So please give a warm round of applause to Ilkka Paananen, co-founder and CEO of Supercell, for joining us today. The way I have structured it is that I have sort of three themes that I would like to cover. One is about the story of Supercell. I promise not to talk about the culture, even though I love to talk about the culture at Supercell a lot. Then maybe related to our course is about about founders and aspiring entrepreneurs, because in your work you of course are an entrepreneur yourself, but you mentor and support a lot of entrepreneurs as well. And in the last part, maybe taking a critical perspective as well, but looking at Finland and the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and what do you see as the challenges and opportunities there? So if we start maybe with the story of Supercell, how did you and your co-founders come up with the concept for Supercell? I know it's a broad question, but maybe I specify it by saying that in entrepreneurship and startups, we often talk about moving fast and breaking things, but I'm guessing it probably took a long time to learn about the gaming industry and starting to have firm opinions on how to run a gaming company.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. This place is very close to my heart. I used to study here a while ago, let's put it that way. This building didn't exist at that time. To your question, I think the one thing to realize about Supercell that it wasn't our first company. We in 2010 when we founded Supercell, we were like this group of 6 co-founders, and each of us had been in the games industry for like more or less a decade, 10 years. And we've a subset of that group had myself included, we had founded this company called Sumea back in the year 2000, had sold it to a company called Digital Chocolate, based out of Silicon Valley. And I personally stayed at Digital Chocolate for almost 6 years, which I would oftentimes I kind of call that my kind of MBA in sort of I guess management and in a bit also entrepreneurship, and kind of when we sold our company we were like 40 people in size. When I left Digital Chocolate it was like 400 people in size, and 3 different studios in Helsinki, Barcelona, and in San Mateo, California. But anyway, like to put a long story short, like during those 10 years of Sumea and then Digital Chocolate, I was lucky enough to be I guess sort of kind of a number 2 guy of the company, and which meant that as we kind of grew the company, I made a huge amount of mistakes, and then I would say that based on everything that I had learned, or we had learned as a group during the last 10 years, and based on almost I would say that based on the learnings of those failures, we kind of founded Supercell.
Okay, wonderful. Maybe connecting to this one, initially the question was going to be about moments in Supercell's journey, but maybe we can step even further back. If we look back, are there certain key moments that stand out to you from the journey where you thought this was a so-called make or break moment? It could be related to Supercell, but it could be also prior to that.
Yeah, well actually, there's a couple of moments back from those Digital Chocolate days that are actually led to the foundation of Supercell a few years later. So the first one was, maybe to give you a little bit of background. So I used to studied here industrial management engineering, and of course, those of you who come from that sort of a class, I guess, you would know that lots of those people, everybody is super analytical, and it's all about this analytical thinking, and at least when I was studying it, there was literally people had these 2 big dream jobs. So either you wanted to be a management consultant, or you wanted to be a investment banker, preferably in London. So that was what, and I was a little bit of the same, but then I actually got super lucky. There was this one class called New Venture Development, and that got me excited about actually build entrepreneurship, which really wasn't the thing in those days. But anyway, so if you think about I sort of approached games as an industry through this very analytical lens. So I honestly thought that in the games industry you can kind of outsmart the competition by just having a smarter strategy, you know, and you know, like having like better processes and those type of things. And this sort of, and then therefore me and you know, my sort of kind of leadership team, we set up like you know, all kinds of processes, like how do we think about new games development, like how do new games get greenlit for production and those type of things. And of course it was very well intended. I mean, all we wanted to do was to like, you know, make some great games. But then there was this moment, like many years later, probably like good 7 years in. Mm-hmm. There, you know, we had this kind of Christmas party was approaching, and you know, I was gonna do this kind of end of the year type of presentation at that party, and then I thought it'd be actually fun, you know, to sort of celebrate those whatever 7 years, like just to put together a list of all the games that we've ever put out as a company from all of our studios, and maybe then rank them like based on success, and then I did that. And there, you know, imagine you have like those days, like our type of companies would put out like 20 games per year, so lots of games, which is very different than what it's today. But you know, I was looking at this sorted list of like tens and tens of games, and I was looking like sort of the top 5 games, and say like, then you know, it kind of dawned on me that it's actually pretty incredible that you know, like sort of the good news is that yes, we are able to put some like very good games out there. The sort of bad news personally, or the disappointment, was that you know, if I look at the top games, they actually came outside all these official processes I had like spent so much time thinking about and setting up. So the usual story actually was that for some reason there was a group of people in one of our studios. We didn't have anything for them to do. So these guys, instead of like going through some kind of process and you know, pitching like what type of games they want to do, which then we would approve, you know, they actually like start to work on a game on their own. And then it just happened that all of the top games were built this way. So instead of like the management, myself telling people what to do, you know, these game developers will build what they wanted to do. And that was such a moment of truth, and it forced me to like really take a very deep and long look at the mirror. And you know, the sort of conclusion was that wow, like we are actually able to put out great games, but it's not because of what I do, it's despite everything that I put in place, which is a shocking realization. And then the other moment, you know, and these two are connected, so bear with me. So I do remember this day, then our CEO at that time, like he had like come across the original like Netflix culture deck. And if you haven't read the deck, Google it and make sure you go to the very first version of it, because that's the best one. So anyway, so that came out, I think it came out in 2009, so actually sometime later from this presentation. And then they had this phrase that kind of stuck to my head, which was like, you know, we are a kind of culture of freedom and responsibility. And as the company grows and the complexity grows, instead of like you putting together more processes to kind of control the complexity, actually what you should do is reduce the number of processes, but hire better people and give them that freedom that comes with responsibility. And that's how these two moments are connected. And then sort of we got this idea that, hey, like what, I mean, if it's really all about the team, the original team, like what if you would like found a new type of games company where instead of a top management, like, you know, owning the vision for what type of games the company would do, like what if you would think about yourself almost as a platform for best creative people, and you would have these like independent teams, which we then later on start to call cells, where the name of Supercell comes from. And what if you would actually give them this complete independence and responsibility? And that's the whole foundation of Supercell, and it's this idea of like letting go control and just focusing like what in our experience were the most important things. So having the best possible teams operating in the best possible culture, and just then having this sort of naive belief that something great would come out of it. And that was the foundation, but it took us 10 years to get to this thing, and lots of failures.
Right, wonderful. But I mean, if I just follow up on this one, and you've probably been asked about this, you know, there is this whole phenomenon of founder mode, being discussed. Maybe now not so much anymore. 6 months ago, it was more popular. But part of it is about being obsessive and almost controlling every process. But you're almost arguing for the opposite. How do you make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are the opposite of founder mode. And you know, by the way, like, you know, founder mode, I'm sure works beautifully in certain type of businesses. And there's like countless of examples of unbelievably great companies who are applied founder mode. But you are, I mean, and here's like one lesson, like for everybody, like who's thinking about founding their own company, like, you know, there is no like right or wrong. You just need to, there's no right or wrong path. You need to pick the right path that happens to be the right path for you. And for Supercell, like, you know, we happen to think, you know, very differently from the founder mode. And the whole idea is based on this this concept of try to hire people who are smarter and better than you are. And then once you have those people, like trust them 100%, not 99%, but 100%. And in our sort of thesis is that when all of this power is like so-called like delegated to these game teams, it results in two really good things. The first one is that you know, decisions are made like the closest to the product, which is in our games is games, where the decisions are made also closest to the end user, the player. So and the thesis is that leads to actually better decisions. So the people who actually work on the product would have a better view than somebody who's distant, like for example myself. So that's the first kind of a rationale behind our model. The second one is just simply like it goes without saying that if the team or the cell doesn't need to approve like their decisions like by the higher ups, then you know by definition you can move faster because that sort of approval loop disappears and the execution is faster. So higher quality of decisions made faster. And then the added side benefit which we've noticed is that it actually, for entrepreneurial people, it's a way more motivating and fun place to work at. Because I mean, and you sort of feel that you are in the control of your game's destiny. And one of the most beautiful ways that I've ever heard anybody describe Supercell culture, we had this very, very senior game developer who had been in the industry for like 15 years or something like that, and he, you know, this was some time back or many years ago, but he approached me at the coffee machine and said, "Hey, I actually need to tell you something that." You know, when you kind of talked about the independence of these cells, I actually kind of didn't believe you because everybody says the same thing, but here it actually is true. And then he continued to say that Supercell is the first company where if your game isn't successful, you don't have excuses. Because in traditional games company, you can always blame the management, you can always blame the processes, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But because we pretty much don't have any of that, there are no excuses. And that made it like extremely motivating for him to work at Supercell.
Yeah, really, that's really inspiring, and I think many of us would love to work in Supercell because of that as well. But is this something that you just have to learn through the mistakes? Like you said, you know, looking back at the games that were successful, or maybe being biased here, is this something we can even teach? You know, well, if not at a university, but through some experiences, or is it just the fact that you have to go through those failures first and then realize that that's the way to lead?
Well, again, I want to emphasize there are very successful companies, including game companies, who operate exactly the opposite way. So, for example, the CEO has a kind of game design background and is very passionate about that, and then, you know, basically ultimately decides what type of games to do. And it's not doesn't have to be that black and white for many companies. Maybe there's a hybrid model, but we happen to be on the far end, on the extreme of trusting people. So again, I want to emphasize, just because like we've been successful, don't just blindly copy what we've done. Like do whatever makes sense for your business and whatever business that might be. But for us, like certainly like what made us like believe in this like in so strongly, because we had seen kind of the negatives that come from the different type of approach. But of course, the advantage that we've had is that we've sort of built the whole company based on this idea. Like every single person we've hired, by now we're like 800 people, has been hired with this thinking in mind and against these sort of values, these values of, you know, independence and responsibility. So we are sort of lucky from that point of view, because this has been the idea from the very beginning. And lots of CEOs of gaming companies, but also other companies, have been really curious about our kind of cell model, as we call it, and then asked me that, hey, like, what should I do to like, you know, transform my company to this type of culture and model? And I actually don't know how, because I mean, you almost would need to start the company from scratch, I believe. If you kind of, because ultimately culture is people. It's culture is like, you know, the everyday work, how people be, you know, how the way of working. And if you've been working like certain way for a few decades and you hired certain type of people who are like accustomed to that way of working, changing that is hard.
Yeah, and maybe the last topic on this is related to, so I was talking to Morten Mikkos actually, and he gave me some tips on what to ask as well. And he mentioned that, you know, on a podcast you talked about that for you, that you're in the charge of the product, but the product for you is now the organization, not necessarily any particular game. And then also in your blog post, you know, in the Forever game, you talked a little bit about almost being the least powerful CEO. Can you share a little bit about how does this actually translate to your leadership style, and, you know, what are the changes you've had to make as well?
Sure. So maybe like first I'll start from this concept or idea or ideal of being the least powerful CEO. And sometimes I regret like using that phrase because oftentimes it gets misunderstood. But what I mean by that is that going back to our cell model, like if you think about like what would be the ideal state of a company, it would be the one where, you know, most if not all decisions were made by these cells. Because if they were made by these cells, we would execute as fast as you possibly can. And that's sort of the ideal. And in that ideal, if like 100% of the decisions are made by the cells, meaning that 0% of the decisions are made by myself, well, wouldn't that then make me the least powerful CEO? So that's sort of the kind of the thinking behind that phrase, which, you know, 9 times out of 10 it gets misunderstood. And then, you know, like and Morten is right. Like I actually do think, you know, my product is definitely the organization and the culture and the people, not the games. And that actually has been the case from the very beginning. And you know, ironically, like I believe that one of my strengths as a gaming company CEO is that I have no background in game development. I can't, well, I did a couple of courses of coding here and just to realize that I really suck at coding. I definitely can't, you know, draw or do any kind of art. Like I can't do any visuals. Well, thanks to AI these days I can, but previously I couldn't. I definitely don't. I mean, of course I have opinions about games and maybe even game design, but they aren't the best opinions, like by any means. So I'm, like from that point of view, like it's maybe easier for me to be a little bit distant from those type of things. And it's maybe easier for me to like trust these people who I 100% know that they're way better in all of those crafts than I am. And you know, like from even like, you know, from like the day one of Supercell, like I never kind of saw my role as somebody who, like, you know, directs the game or even chooses what type of games to do. Because in the day one of Supercell, I just trusted the other 5 co-founders because I was the only one who comes from this background. Everybody else like had deep game development background.
Okay, thanks. So if we now move from here to, you know, talking about founders and aspiring entrepreneurs, also putting it in the context of the course, you know, Introduction to Entrepreneurship. So in your role and position today, you know, you mentor, support, and interact with a lot of, you know, what we like to say startup curious people, or even, of course, also founders. What would you say are the signs that someone will be a strong founder, or, you know, what are the behaviors or characteristics you look out for?
Well, sort of a behavior, so maybe characteristics that I look out for, and this is just, you know, basically maybe a bit of a kind of pattern recognition or what I've seen in other in successful founders. First of all, like the most successful founders, they have a very high level of ambition, which is an easy thing to say. But what it means that you have to be very bold. You can't be afraid of taking risks. Because if you're afraid of taking risks, you'll never do like an outlier success. Because you have to have a courage to be like controversial, like think differently. Like what I just explained about Supercell culture. Now, it of course very easy for me to talk about it because we've been successful and everybody really loves the idea. But I do remember when we were getting started, it was an extremely controversial idea. I mean, honestly, there were no gaming companies at scale who would operate that way, and I would still argue there probably aren't many companies like that who operate like that at scale. So it's a very controversial idea in many different ways. So you have to be sort of bold and then stick to your guns and do something that is different. So that's kind of ambition, risk-taking, all of those things. Then you just have to have a very, very curious mind. You just call them curious entrepreneurs. I love that word. You have to have this curious mind. And the curiosity, for me, like almost goes hand in hand with being humble. So just recognizing that no matter like how smart I believe that I am, or how successful I've been, or my team has been, or my product has been, it can always be better. And you're always curious, looking for ways to make it better, like one way or another. So that's one thing. Then the best entrepreneurs are super, super hungry. Like they are and it's kind of a cliche, but they are ready to do like whatever it takes to make the company successful. And it's a super challenging, stressful, but a very exciting and fun journey for the right people. But it's not gonna be easy, and you have to have that like immense drive to do that. And entrepreneurship is all about these ups and downs. Like even Supercell, like for most people, it may look like an instant success. I can tell you, it was nothing like that in the early days. We kept on failing until we got lucky and put our first hit game out. And there are like so many twists and turns in the story. But it doesn't end there. We lie that most entrepreneurs, including myself, keep on telling us that, hey, once I get to this point, then it will get easier. And here's the sad truth: it does not. It gets harder. So, one might think, oh, Supercell has put out these 6 super successful games. Probably putting out the 7th one is easier. But no, it actually becomes harder, because the more successful you are, the bigger things you want to achieve, the more risks you need to take, and it just becomes harder and harder and harder from many different points of view. It's almost like you climb on a mountain, and then you thought for a minute you feel really good, and you feel that yes, I made it, and then you look ahead and say, there's way higher mountain ahead. And that's also the fun of it. And I think the best entrepreneurs who don't just set up a company and run it for 3-4 years and then they get the first acquisition offer, they just sell it and do something else. I'm not talking about those type of entrepreneurs, but the very best entrepreneurs I've seen in my life who have been doing the things they do for decades and decades and decades, they have that type of mentality.
Okay. Yeah, so if I continue on this, and if I go, back to this word founder curious, because I think in Aalto and many of the people in the audience here are probably those who see entrepreneurship as a relevant career path, but have not yet taken that step. What would your best advice for them be? Is it just to take that leap, or is there something that they can do to better prepare themselves as well?
I've been thinking about that a lot, and there's many different perspectives to that question. So my story obviously is that I've sort of never had a real job. If you ask my mom, that's what she would tell you. I mean, one, I've been an entrepreneur always, and two, I've been an entrepreneur in games. So that's probably how she would think about it and does think about it. I oftentimes I thought that should I have actually joined another company before founding Sumia, the first company. I literally I had no idea what I was doing. And the only reason that I became the CEO of Sumia was that there's no one else these guys could get to help them, and everybody else was a game developer. And I was willing to work for free, and I was living actually here in Otaniemi, super low cost of living, and took some student loans to keep myself alive and that type of thing. So there's actually a lot of benefits in jumping to that train very early, because you kind of have nothing to lose, and if it doesn't work out, I mean, you'll get a job, and it's okay. And the more time you wait, you go to work for somebody, or start to get this nice pay, and maybe you form a family, and your kind of cost of living goes up. So then some people get quite risk averse, and maybe for a good reason. So it might be harder to make that sort of leap of faith. But when on the other hand, there is value in sort of gaining some experience before you jump on that train. So maybe like where I've ended up in, and of course again depends on the case, but maybe it would be a good idea to not, and I wouldn't join a big company, but I would maybe perhaps join either a startup or scale up at its very early phases, not too late, but at its early phases, just to kind of learn, about things before making that leap. But I think it's also like when you kind of see the opportunity, and if you feel really good about it. So and I think the biggest and the most important criteria is that if you happen to meet like 2, 3 like amazing people who, and you all have you feel a fantastic idea and you think this is kind of unicorn team, this is a unicorn set of people, then maybe that to me would be the good enough of a reason to start immediately. So, but those are sort of my thoughts about it. But maybe like the most important advice is that just start doing it, because the only way to learn is to do it.
So if we look back at your own journey as a student in Otaniemi and then at Aalto Ventures Garage, which now is Aalto Entrepreneurship Society, and all these ecosystem activities, what did you experience or learn while in university that maybe turned out useful for you, but also made you commit to taking that push or taking on that responsibility?
This may sort of surprise you, but like for me, like if I think about the classes, the transformational classes for me actually weren't. They had very little to do with my major, which was strategy at the end of the day. So I actually I remember taking some classes on like psychology, because that actually got me super interested about like leadership and organizational design, which is still like my biggest passion. That's what I'm super passionate about, like what makes a great team, how you build it, and team dynamics, and they are somehow related to psychology as well and work psychology. So that was something that I still fondly remember. I mean, and I just, I happened to be curious about it, and I just wanted to see how, what that is all about. I knew nothing about it. So that was one thing, and the other thing is sort of class like this, that actually brings people together from various different backgrounds, and that's something, and that sort of lighted my kind of passion for actually building something of my own. But the most important thing that I learned was work ethic, because I mean I'm sure it's the same today here, but I mean if I look at look at the kind of first 2 years here, me and my friends we worked like crazy. I mean, I remember we had some kind of a case study or report to return, and we would be there in Maarintalo till 2 a.m. And something like that, and then your deadline was 8 a.m. and you go and you return that piece of paper, and it sounds like maybe even too simplistic, but it really is true that ultimately you have to learn that work ethic, and what it made it even better is that because if I remember those times, I felt that everybody in this class is way smarter than me, which was probably true, but that also you can learn to work with the kind of the best people, and maybe also compete a little bit with the best, and you kind of start to understand where is the bar if you really want to be great at something, and what sort of greatness looks like, and for example, I never forget this. We had this course called marketing research, where you would do a marketing research study for a company. And I was super lucky. I was in the same class with this guy called Sami Inkinen, who was one of the best entrepreneurs ever, coming out from Finland, and listed Trulia, his company, to the New York Stock Exchange, and now he's working on something else. So he's a true serial entrepreneur, one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, and a really good guy. But I just remember he took part of that course as well, and he was and then my group had to be the kind of what do you call it, the opponent for his study. So we had to make comments about his study, and we were looking literally at his study, and I cannot think of anything negative to say. I mean, I simply couldn't do any better than what Sami has done here. And it was fantastic. And I say like, wow, this is what truly world class looks like. And then Sami, of course, did the opposite, or did the same. He was looking at our study, which was like way worse. But being a polite guy he was like super polite and didn't sort of trash it as was the kind of a, at least at that time, that was seemed to be the habit in that course. But he was like such a polite guy and gave us some really great improvement suggestions. But that I still remember that because I thought that, wow, like this is what world class looks like. I mean, you're incredibly smart. You do incredibly, high quality work, but yet you kind of stay humble and you're friendly. But there are those type of moments actually which are like have been extremely valuable for me that I kind of got from the university. So it's less about sort of what exactly did I study or these books and so on.
Yeah. No, so of course, because being in a university and working as a lecturer, and I think with the strategy that Aalto is trying to pursue of even creating more founders, I would love to get, your perspective on what are the things that we could do even more of. So I guess a lot of it is about giving opportunities to students to meet even smarter students than themselves, creating environments where they challenge themselves. Is there anything else that maybe comes to mind?
Well, I think you touched on the most important thing. So as long as like you guys can bring the kind of the best and the most talented, the brightest people together, and you somehow facilitate them kind of bumping into each other, and you kind of, and of course you have to create the context around it, which could be, for example, like case studies or setting up your own virtual companies, whatever that is. I think that's super valuable. The other point that I would make, which is actually been a huge learning for me in my path, is that how important is the diversity of the team. I mean, that's something that usually gets like completely overlooked. And I'm the best example of that because Supercell, to face the truth, like we founded the company between like 6 Finnish males. So not a very diverse group, right? But now, like over the years, I've learned like there's like incredible amount of value of having people who like look and feel and think very, very differently. And now we are at a completely different place. So even in our Helsinki office, I think we have people from 62 countries or so, and maybe 2/3 of people maybe come from somewhere else these days, out of the new recruitments and all that. And of course we still need have work to do, but it's not just the difference in like ethical backgrounds and those type of things, genders, etc. But it's also like how it's so important to have like people who think differently than you are. So one of my advices actually would be that do not found your company with your best friends, because if you're at least my group of best friends, we think pretty much alike. We are kind of quite like-minded. So then and that's why we like each other, because we don't argue about stuff, at least most of the time. But the disadvantage when you're building a company is that you actually want that tension, you want those arguments. And if you're about to decide something, it's extremely valuable to have very different points of views and perspectives to that thing. And then, there's going to be tension and arguments and stuff. But then the best teams can then disagree and commit, as they put it. So you can align on something and then you just execute, and then the kind of talk is over and everybody just executes against the same common goal. But I fundamentally believe that you get to way better results, way better decisions, then there are like many different perspectives and that you can sort of consider before you make the final call. So bringing, to cut the long story short, like if you bring really bright people from different backgrounds together, you somehow make them collide and then, give them an opportunity to do something together. Maybe that something at some point might even, lead to founding a company.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the analogy of or the word serendipity here as well, because in many ways at a university, what we can do is increase the odds for that, but we can't, of course, guarantee something like that turning out, but we can always make it more likely that something will succeed. But maybe looking at the other side, we talked about, the characteristics that you look for. What are some maybe damaging mistakes or damaging characteristics that you think founders make or have done previously?
Well, one thing would be that you look at a successful company or a successful entrepreneur, and then you just blindly copy whatever that company or that entrepreneur is doing, and you're not being true to yourself. So, for example, there was this time in, I would say, when in the Finnish startup community, like maybe a decade ago or so, that all of a sudden, like all the presentations start to look like Steve Jobs presentations. And those, everybody like knows that Steve Jobs made these fantastic presentations, but it's not that everybody can adopt his style, because it's a very unique style, and for some people it works out well, but I would argue that for majority maybe it does not. So my point being is that don't try to be anyone who you're not. Like, just be yourself. And by the way, it applies now. Like, now you're listening to like the Supercell culture and everything that I told you. Just the fact that Supercell has been successful, it doesn't mean that our culture would be the right culture for you. And of course, in Supercell's case, and as in every company's case, luck plays a massive role in everything that they've done. So sometimes like people make the mistake that, oh, let's just copy what this person did, and it leads us to the success. But then they kind of forget that whatever what was done, oftentimes it was done like 10 years ago, so maybe it's not applicable anymore today. Maybe they were in a different business completely. They have different products, different customers. Again, doesn't apply. Maybe they just got lucky. There's a real possibility that it played a huge role, and usually luck is about timing. Supercell being a good example of that. So don't blindly copy, other people, and be who you are would be one advice. The other thing is that like lots of things, like from surface they look easy, and oftentimes when you read these hero stories and you look at successful companies, from outside looking in, they look easy, and then sometimes people fall into this trap that, let's take whatever this company did and then we'll make it a bit better and then they'll be fine. Mm-hmm. But that type of thing, like I've almost never seen it work. Rather, it's those bold, controversial ideas that don't really exist, that you do something like fundamentally different, that can become these outlier successes.
Okay. And yeah, maybe touching upon now the Spark program that Supercell is running, can you maybe share a little bit more about, why did you launch it? Because of course in your blog post you talked about also potentially the program is one way for you to know if Supercell at some point is the incumbent firm that might get replaced by another Supercell in the future. But yeah, could you just share your motivations behind why you decided to create the program?
Yes. So sort of the thinking about behind the program is actually quite simple. So first of all, we just fundamentally believe that the best teams create the best games, and of course those best teams need to operate in what we call the best culture. But if a starting point is the best team, then a few years ago we started to think about like how can we get more thoughtful and maybe even systematical about putting together these best teams. And then we decided that like let's create almost like a separate like team lab, which we call Spark, which is actually separate from our headquarters. And the goal of that that lab, that Spark program, is to be the best in the world in building new game teams. Be the best in the world to building new game teams, and how we do it is it's sort of a program that takes quite a few weeks, and it sort of combines the expertise of some veteran Supercellians. We even have a kind of professional sports psychologist who helps us, and we try out different team combinations. And even full teams can apply, but even if you're just individual, you can apply. And if you make it, then we try to like figure out like if there's a team there for you. And it's very much like we are basically looking like these entrepreneurial people who actually could be like founders of new game companies. But if if all you want to do is to create a great game, then you don't need to actually worry about anything else because we're going to take care of that. So you don't need to worry about raising money, setting up a company or, hiring a bunch of admin and finance people to, do all of those things. I mean, the only thing that you need to focus on is to create a great game, and of course then we can, through our expertise, help you to do that. But we are looking for these founder-minded people to enter that program, and actually, and the other thing is that it's open both internally for Supercellians, but it's also very importantly open for all the external people as well. And there's a process, and I also see that as a way to get some fresh thinking to the company, people who think completely different to what we do.
Yeah, and maybe I'm a bit biased here, but do you see possible parallels for this for other companies or other industries to, create a model like this similar, or, here at Aalto, could we create something like this where, like you said, you take away the risks of unnecessary things so that they can really focus on what they're passionate for? Is this model replicable? Or?
Well, I think there's been sort of versions of it which have been quite successful. So, for example, before we set up Spark, we spent some time studying, for example, Y Combinator, which is probably the most famous program in the world. Of course, there's quite a few differences in there, but took some learnings from them. Some of you guys may have heard about this kind of lab called Xerox Labs, which, for example, invented the mouse, if you recall, and that's where kind of Steve Jobs actually discovered mouse for the first time. So we've been trying to get the inspiration from those type of programs, and yeah, for sure, I think this type of models for sure could work for our companies and universities like Aalto, etc.
Okay, so if we go from here now more towards the Finnish entrepreneurial ecosystem as a whole, or maybe even European level, but if we look more holistically at Finland, what are some advantages do you see in the ecosystem here? Because we often discuss and adopt, this idea of go west, or many of the top Finnish startups start here, but then have moved abroad. Supercell, of course, famously hasn't, and obviously there must be something that keeps you here. But and also we like to talk about weaknesses, but I think it's nice to also focus on the strengths. So, what do you think are the strengths of the Finnish ecosystem that we have here, and how can we leverage it more?
Well, I think there's many strengths. I happen to believe that Finland is the best country in the world, at least to set up a games company. And that much I can say, and that's the reason why we are still here and will be here. So and those strengths include. You start from the obvious. There's a huge amount of talent here, and we've at least been successful in attracting lots of new talent from abroad to Finland as well. And most people don't know it, but especially for these foreign experts, Finland's taxation is actually relatively competitive, which is a very well kept secret, but it is true because you can apply for these special tax rates. The process of coming here as a skilled worker has been criticized a lot, but it's been getting way better, and it's better than in quite a few countries, and it still has to get better. And good enough, it just isn't enough here. You have to be fantastic, and that's what we need to do as a country. If you are a bit more kind of seasoned veteran, maybe you come with a family, well, I think Finland is one of the best countries in the world to raise your family. For many reasons, starting from safety to having a very kind of functional sort of a society in many different ways. Good schools and so on and so on. So we actually lots of people who we've kind of been able to attract from abroad, say even from places like California. We have this joke, which is partly true, is that if they survive the first winter, oftentimes they are here to stay. The biggest challenge that we have is that oftentimes it's hard for the spouses of these people to get jobs, which is really, really bad, because then they have a hard time integrating to our society. But if the spouse also finds a job, then very few of those people actually leave. So there's lots of those type of advantages. Then there's some not so obvious advantages include stuff like Finland is a very small market, and that's been a massive advantage and nobody speaks our language globally. So that means that, for example, if you set up a games company, there's no question about like, oh, first we launch it in Finland and then we expand to Sweden and maybe then to Denmark and maybe then to Germany and then maybe someday to US. I mean, that's a just irrelevant discussion. You have to go global from day one and you have to think global from day one. And I think that's a massive advantage, like for like smaller countries. Like Israel would be, by the way, another really good example, and they've been way more successful than Finland in, growing or building and growing these tech companies. I think there's been around like 140 IPOs to the New York Stock Exchange from Israel alone. So that's impressive, and our countries are about the same size. But I think smaller countries do have some quite strong advantages.
Yeah. So I'll switch now to some questions from the Presimo, and then we can also try to take a couple questions from the audience live as well. But yeah, one question was that when you chose to pursue gaming, you probably had other passions or potential career paths that you had to leave behind. How did you handle that uncertainty, or did you ever doubt that it was the right path for you?
Again, I feel I just got like lucky in many different ways, and by the way, like some of that luck also it relates to my failures. So for example, a really concrete example was that I remember like after the first or second year of studies, I did what everybody else did, which was to apply to the summer traineeships at investment banks and these management consultants, and I applied. I only remember I applied at least one or two. Well, I didn't even get to the interviews, and I was like just crushed about that. I didn't even get to the interviews, and what's wrong with me and all that. And but then like thinking back, like okay, what if I had gotten to the interviews? What if I had gotten the traineeship? What if I had decided, maybe these guys like they pay me a nice salary, and I just want to become a partner at this whatever management consulting firm, Supercell wouldn't exist. I mean, for sure it wouldn't. And there's like countless examples like this. Like for example, for many years when we sold Sumia to Digital Chocolate, because Digital Chocolate actually never was what it was supposed to be. It never like became a very successful company, despite having backing from Sequoia Capital, Kleiner Perkins, despite being founded by the founder of Electronic Arts. We never became a sort of big and successful games company. And for many years like I kind of regretted why did they sell the company or merged and all that, and this was a mistake. But again, what if it had been a success? Would Supercell exist? Probably not. Same thing with the Supercell original product strategy. We actually didn't start developing games for mobile. We actually started to develop games for Facebook, which made perfect sense at that time, because Facebook by far had the widest reach of gamers in 2010. Didn't work out, and that forced us to look at other opportunities, and then we figured or found out mobile. So when you guys fail, or you think that you fail in something, don't get depressed, because that it actually might be that failure that leads you to something that's way more successful. So that's one thought. The other thought is that for me it actually could have been any company. Of course I grew up playing games, but I actually didn't even play much games in my university times. I maybe didn't have so much time and wasn't as passionate about them anymore. So for me it could have been any company, because I just wanted to build something of my own or be part of a group that built something of their own. I just got super lucky, and I happened to bump to these guys who wanted to found a company, and it happened to be a games company.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think that's a very valuable story for most of us about, what the road not taken potentially as well. There's one question here which was about the idea of letting go of control. It's easier said than done. Probably you have more experience of this now as the CEO of Supercell. So how do you do it? How do you basically let go of the control? Because in many ways, at the end of the day, you are expected to make decisions, and you are sort of responsible for the success of the company.
Yeah, it's a real tricky one. I guess like for me it starts from like these foundations of the company. So this is the reason and the thesis upon which we founded the company. So if I do something that's, you know, against those foundations, then, you know, the company doesn't really exist anymore. And we've number of times we've been to a situation where the team wants or Cell wants to do something, you know, myself and others like disagree, and then they are at this crossroads. But okay, two choices here. One is that you know, we do like what the management we believe is right, and if we are right, then yes, it leads to better business outcome. Negative is that we destroy the whole culture, because if we can do this now, we can never ever say again that Supercell is about these independent cells, simply because it's not true. And then the other option is that okay, we trust the team. Okay, two different options in there. One is that they are successful, then great. Two, what if the team is wrong? Well, in that case, we made the wrong business call, but it's for us, it's never been as important to make the right business call as it's to like, you know, keep the culture. So for us, like, you know, even if we can reach like a better business goals, but if at the same time we destroy the culture, like, you know, that's, you know, something that we would be unacceptable for us. And you have to just constantly remind yourself about those type of things and just believe that this is the case.
Yeah. Do we have any questions live from the audience as well? So maybe, yeah.
I'd be interested to hear about your thoughts on like the dynamics of building the culture when times are tough versus when times are really good. Because you talked about the sort of ups and downs, and so how has that been different, and how have you managed in those two different situations?
Great question. So how do you build culture, like, you know, when times are good versus when times are bad? The best time to build culture is when times are bad. You know, I mean, there's this saying that never let a good crisis like go away. I mean, you know, just, you know, leverage that to the max. And I feel that the best decisions that we've made, the hardest ones, have always been made in bad times. And you know, people talk about, you know, Ben Horowitz talks about in his very famous book about, like, you know, peacetime CEOs and wartime CEOs. And in a way, like, I think that, you know, in kind of these war times, and when things are bad, you know, that's when the culture is truly created. And in a way, like the war times, it's maybe easier to create that culture, because then, you know, when things are, especially things are like really, really bad, you know, then usually all the bullshit flies out the window and you just do like whatever you need to do to win that war. But then, and contrast that to a situation where things are really, really good, then the challenges are different, because then it's a human nature that the things are good, like, you know, you start to be maybe a bit too happy about yourself, you become overly confident. In our case, you know, there was this a period of time where I feel that we were really like, we didn't really pay much attention what was happening outside us. We became quite close-minded. We probably like believed in a way that we can walk on water, because like everything that we like put out like just seemed to be these like amazing successes. This is many, many years ago, but we oftentimes the danger is that you kind of it's almost like the winner's curse, or you can fall into this trap. You become victim of your own success, and there's a tendency to kind of repeat the stuff that you believe have made you successful. And therefore you don't actually do anything that's kind of new and radical and innovative. So in good times you need to like fight really, really hard against those type of things and do whatever you can to keep yourself and the rest of our organization like hungry and humble and open-minded and those type of things.
Do we have one more question? Yeah.
How do best founders approach problem discovery? So how do they find distinct, clear problems to solve?
So how do the best founders discover, I guess, the right problems or problems worth solving? Good question. I guess it's sort of I mean, you have to have like some experience. I mean, you have to have like somehow bumped into that problem, like, you know, whether that, and more oftentimes you kind of encountered that problem in a previous company that you worked for, or through some other connection, or maybe like if you're in a consumer business, maybe you happen to talk to or interact with like certain set of like consumers or people, and then you kind of through that you kind of discover like that there's a problem, and hey, actually, what if we would solve it that way? But it's a fantastic question, because oftentimes, and especially when you're sort of selling to businesses, but probably like when you're selling to consumers as well, like there are sometimes there are too many ideas which are kind of solutions looking for problem, as opposed to like, okay, here's a problem and let's solve it. And of course, not my core expertise, because we build games, and it's not that they go out in the street and ask people what are your problems, and then we develop games to solve those problems. So it just doesn't work that way. So games is very close to, like, say, music, for example, or maybe movies, but probably even closer to music, where I have a really hard time like thinking that the best sort of bands would like create their hit songs by doing some kind of market research. It's a kind of creative first industry, which I fundamentally believe that games also is. But I guess it depends on the industry.
Great. So maybe the final question back from my side, going back again to your blog post in the Forever game, which I think is, if you haven't read it, please do. I think it's really nice to see that someone in your position is able to talk so honestly and openly about your role, and also the lack maybe of your responsibility in the success of things that happened at Supercell. For example, giving a lot of the praise to your team rather than taking the credit yourself. But we touched upon this particular phrasing before as well, about this idea of outlier successes, and I want to ask your perspective on how do you think this values or views of framing risks as outlier successes as opposed to likely failures can be translated to both entrepreneurs and also to the ecosystem here? Because it's always easy to think about the risks, but like you talk about in the blog post, it's about framing these risks as outlier successes.
Yeah, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and like if I think about the biggest outlier successes, say at Supercell, or some of the investments that I made, like Volt probably being the best example, but some others as well, where I was like there like from day one, and as an early investor, the common denominator, be it in our biggest hit games and something like Volt, is that these successes and how big they would become, how immensely big they would become, it wasn't obvious. It was very far from obvious when they kind of started, and maybe that's the thing. And even if I think about like especially the games industry, but also like think about something like Airbnb or even Instagram or Facebook, and these type of huge successes. I mean, it's not that they were obvious from day one, and there's oftentimes this story that these entrepreneurs, they pitch their idea to the VCs and they get like so many no's until there's that somebody who's brave and invests to something, and the reason why these outlier successes aren't obvious is that they are so different, they are so controversial, and you just somehow you don't see them coming. And I do remember, like, for example, say again examples from games industry, but I was lucky to observe like Minecraft when it first came out, obviously one of the biggest games in the planet still today, and I trust me, like no one could have seen that coming when Markus Persson was developing the game like on his own. The team was like I think exactly 1 or 2 people or 3 people, and this really quirky looking game, and no one got it at the time. But then look what happened, or and there are our Roblox is the same story, by the way, like exactly the same story. Like for many years, people just thought that okay, this is just like this kind of nerdy geeky thing, where who would ever use it. And by the way, same goes with Supercell games. I remember 2012, I was showing very early prototype of Clash of Clans to some of the most well-known game industry veterans in California in Game Developers Conference. I was showing to lots of his senior people who I actually at that time, and I still do, but I looked up to those people. I was showing the game on the iPad, and the most common reaction from those people was this question, which was the following: why would anybody play this game? And why did they ask that? They asked it because Clash of Clans, it was a completely different type of game. It was on iPad. These guys, obviously there wasn't that many games on iPad at that time. Free to play, we gave it out for free. And you know, like from their perspective, like they even say that this doesn't even like feel like a real game to me. And you keep that in mind, then you kind of like, one, if you look something that like feels weird and completely out of place and controversial, but also like then you start to, you know, develop your own idea. I mean, somebody once told me that the best ideas are ones that initially, like, you know, most people don't get, and they might even hate the idea, but there's a like passionate few who absolutely love the idea. And if the idea is strong enough, that love will slowly or even faster will start to spread. And these people who like absolutely believe in the idea, in the product, they love it, they will start to convert people around them to use it too. And that's also like one way to think about it. But I think that if you really truly want to get to outlier success, I think you have to be bold, you have to take risk, and you have to build something that doesn't exist yet. And yeah, I mean, if you build something that doesn't exist yet, you know, there's a chance of like probably like a 9 out of 10, or I don't know, 19 out of 20, or even worse, but it won't succeed. And it's okay. It's part of the game. But those ones then that succeed can hit it big.
Wonderful. So unfortunately we're out of time, but thank you, Ilkka, once more. And yeah, please help me in giving a warm round of applause to Ilkka Paananen.
Thank you.
So just before we wrap up, I'll ask my colleague Klaus or Aalto to change the screen at the back so that we would also love to get feedback. This is the first time we're doing something like this, but definitely not the last. And we would also love to hear more about what kind of topics and what kind of questions we should ask more from founders like Ilkka. But thank you again, Ilkka, so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.